Chapter 10. According to the files that Nirasawa had pulled, the head paper pusher on Bunda wasn't used to dealing with execs. Kevin Vincent was a botanist who'd been moved into admin by pure happenstance, a chart watcher for the 30-plus techs on the small planet. Considering Vincent had made the monumental error of letting one of his people answer the Nemesis shuttle's CDS, Briggs couldn't be more pleased with the circumstances. In his experience, scientists were a mostly spineless bunch, and Vincent wouldn't know that the mistake was a minor one, or that Briggs had been aware of the situation since well before the contact had been made. With as long as the shuttle had been drifting, there was no chance of infection, but Briggs didn't want anyone to meet with the survivors before he did. He grinned, looking forward to meeting Vincent and exercising his persuasive skills. The man would be under his thumb in less than a minute. Nirasawa silently brought him a drink while Keen put in the call, the beverage as much for effect as anything. A suit holding a cocktail would scare the shit out of a botanist stationed someplace like Bunda. "Mr. Briggs?" The granite-faced Keen had stepped into his cabin, his massive frame tucked into a tailor-made suit, a brown so dark it was almost black. The equally bulky Nirasawa was dressed the same. Briggs liked the look of a matched set. Briggs nodded, tapping the connect key on the contoured wall unit, leaning back in his chair and taking a sip of his drink. A thin-faced man, 40 TS or so with straggly blonde hair, peered into the cabin. "Mr. Briggs?" Vincent was already scared. Briggs could see the sweat on his upper lip, the high-res screen showing him each beaded droplet in perfect clarity. "I'm Kevin Vincent, ASM 377, Bunda Survey?" "I know who you are," Briggs said. "And I understand you contacted a shuttle from Nemesis before you alerted the Home Office?" He leaned forward, setting the drink down and staring coldly at the nervous Vincent. "And that you've already sent assistance to this shuttle? Is this accurate information?" Vincent nodded rapidly, talking to match it. "Yes, sir. The A1 didn't say anything about not talking to anyone in distress, and my crew put in a call immediately to—" "Yes, I understand all that," Briggs said. "What you don't understand is how extremely delicate this matter is, and how continued mismanagement of this situation might result in some rather severe consequences." Vincent looked miserable and said nothing. Time for the push. Briggs lifted his glass again, relaxing his tone. "Earthside wants me to handle this personally, but I'm still 12 hours away, give or take. The shuttle would set down in just under 3. Tell me, can I trust that the company will have your full cooperation?" Vincent couldn't answer quickly enough. "Yes, sir. Everyone. Whatever you need, our entire operation is at your disposal." Briggs nodded. "Fine. That's fine. I want the shuttle quarantined. No one in or out, and no interaction between your staff and the people on board, physical or verbal." Vincent nodded, swallowing heavily before speaking. There may be someone in need of medical attention, Mr. Briggs." Briggs knew that already, knew everything that had been passed between the shuttle and Bunda. 3 people were on board. A communications tech on contract, a volunteer ground squad leader, and a Max doc. The Max tech, a Brian K. Ellis, had been injured somehow. "No interaction," he repeated, in a voice that promised death and destruction to anyone stupid enough to disobey. "Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Briggs smiled coldly. "Then we have nothing more to discuss." Vincent nodded, finally wiping the sweat from his face with the back of one hand. "Yes, sir. I'll have our LZ coordinates sent to—" Briggs tapped the disconnect before he could finish, satisfied that his instructions would be followed to the letter. With non-exec types, fear was usually their best motivator, especially with scientists. All Vincent wanted now was to get Briggs the hell away from Bunda as quickly as possible, so that he might return to his quiet little study habits. He glanced around the plush cabin and saw that Keane had disappeared, probably gone back up to flirt with Irwin. The pilot struck Briggs as distinctively uninterested in male company, but Keane's intellect didn't exactly parallel his size. As long as he didn't interfere with her flying. Nirasawa, call up the psych profiles on our 3 survivors and run persuasion thresholds. I want direct and indirect stim, relationship differentials, and method probabilities. The guard had been standing patiently next to the cabin entrance, waiting for direction. Right away, Mr. Briggs. Shall I report orally, or would you prefer an interjection in the files? Holy hell. Just write it up. Let me know when you're finished, Briggs snapped, unable to sustain his irritation for more than a second. He was quite content with the smooth progression thus far, and feeling positive about the outcome. The Marine, she'll be the one. If it was volunteers only, I might run into trouble. But barring the deceased Pop Izzard, she's the most likely to have dealt with the material, and still be company loyal. Really, he'd already won. Everyone had their price, gain or loss. Once he found hers, or the techs, or the volunteers, it was just a matter of convincing them that he would live up to his half long enough to uncover the data. If they were obtuse enough to believe him, they deserved what they would get. The Yautja didn't keep time the way the humans did, but Naguchi knew they were close to the hunt when the first ship docked to Shell. Just a few came aboard, all blooded, but it was only the first. Within hours, 4 more transports had paused long enough to discharge anywhere from 2 to 7 hunters, veterans all. It seemed that only top-notch trainees would be first hunting. The rest had come for pleasure, which reinforced what she'd already suspected. This was easily the biggest hunt she'd seen, and she had to wonder if there was more than one queen populating whatever planet they'd be fighting on. For so many hunters, the grounds would have to be seeded with hundreds. After crying herself to sleep, Noguchi woke up, unaccountably refreshed and at ease. Soon she knew she'd have to make some hard decisions. She chose to enjoy the mood rather than question it. She dressed in one of her 3 onboard outfits, skimpy clothing that she'd be embarrassed to wear any place but in the over-hot hunter environment. The bodysuit was Nilex, but still frayed after so much wear, and spent a few hours running through forms in the ship's Kerite training room. Yautja days were about 30 hours long, and they slept for just over a third of that period. The 2 or 3 quiet hours that she could claim for herself, excepting the handful of night workers of course, were often the best of her day. A quick rinse in cold basin water, a breakfast of skipake, a kind of fruit stew, and the rest of the ship was awake. Topknot didn't call for training, another clue that the hunt was near. He and the other blooded were cleaning and readying weapons, testing audio loops. They wouldn't need blending camo, what Naguchi had come to think of as the invisibility factor, since bugs didn't have eyes, and marking out territories on a map screen. Left to their own devices, the novices riled themselves into a masculine lather, bragging, shoving, generally acting like young males of any species. Noguchi spent most of the morning avoiding them. She hung around the ship's docking connector in a corner of shadows, watching the visiting hunters come aboard. Tress, and another unblooded she hadn't thought of a name for yet, had been assigned to greet the visitors, directing them to wherever they wanted to go. The mess hall, the armory, guest quarters. Another series of metallic thumps at the lock told her that a 5th, or was it a 6th, ship had docked. Noguchi had just about decided to call the unnamed Yautja Sakana, the Japanese word for fish, when Topknot suddenly appeared at the mouth of the tunnel back to the main part of the ship. Half a dozen novices trailed behind him, their speckled chests heaving with excitement. Loincloths were only the standard dress for the trainees. Blooded generally wore chest harnesses as well, for which he continued to be thankful. The Yautja wouldn't be aroused in any way by her nudity, but she was still human enough to feel some modesty. Topknot and his followers lined up beside Tress and Sakana, the leader speaking quickly, apparently wrapping up a speech he'd been at for a while. Noguchi stepped away from the dark corner, gleaning as much as she could from his postures and words. Her physical makeup made it nearly impossible to speak an entire sentence in their language, but after a year of total immersion, she understood a lot more than they suspected. He is a blooded of songs, a Yautja who wins many children, has trophies of all and many enemies. The leader's respectful tone and the eagerness of his students was impressive. She'd never seen Topknot acknowledge another hunter as anything better than competent. Whoever was docking had quite a reputation, and she decided to stay for his grand entrance. Broken Tusk, the Chunde, was sung about. All great leaders are. Perhaps this one is actually as worthy as he was. As the airlock hummed into motion, Topknot finally noticed her. He silenced the hissing young males, ignoring her. Naguchi was well aware that her presence often complicated matters. She hung back, but she didn't leave, determined to exercise the rights of a blooded hunter, doing as she pleased when not on a hunt. She was surprised when he stepped into view, flanked by two others. He was in front. There was no doubt who was the leader, but he was young. The new arrival wore body armor but no mask. The scars across his speckled brow and on his clawed hands were extensive. But from the condition of his tusks and talons, he looked no older than an unblooded. Topknot greeted him, touching his shoulder and tilting his head, calling him by name, a phlegmy rattle. When the young warrior returned the gesture, Naguchi saw the piece of cloth wrapped around his wrist. And her vision tunneled, her heart skipping a beat. Without thinking, without making the appropriate request to approach, she stepped forward to see it better, certain that she must be mistaken. No, can't be. It was part of a Marine Corps banner, the 3 red stripes for land, sea and aerospace, the design unmistakable, the meaning unmistakable, worn around his right forearm as a trophy, and she reached out to touch it, and remembered herself even as he backhanded her, knocking her to the floor, her arm going numb from the powerful smack. Naguchi submitted automatically, her mind simultaneously chiding her for her stupidity and trying to rationalize the banner. The youthful hunter stared at her for a moment along with Topknot and the others, silent and still, and then turned away, not acknowledging her apology but not interested in pursuing the matter either. As one, the group started out of the lock, her insubordination ignored, but not forgotten. Topknot already telling the newcomers about the territorial stakes. Alone, Naguchi stayed on the floor, feeling conflicted, angry, and embarrassed and horribly confused. No hunter would wear such a thing unless he'd taken it. But the code, it had to have been a fair fight. The Marine must have attacked first because they won't hunt intelligent species. She couldn't even pretend to accept that. The predatory race hunting humans? The difference in technology, in strength, in pure aggressive capacity. Fair didn't enter into it. A hunter could easily slip away from a human assault. It wasn't supposed to happen. There were rules against it in spite of the clan's general xenophobia. And they respect him. If it's such a taboo, why do they respect him? What was his punishment? There was no point in trying to convince herself that the hunter had suffered for his actions. And even if the Marine had attacked first, even if the warrior couldn't get away and was forced to kill, she was human. Human, and living with a race that is disgusted by me and those like me. Hunting with a race that exalts a human killer. This hunt would be her last. No one would be sorry to see her go. Topknot would surely be thrilled to drop her off somewhere populated by her own kind. And then what? Go back to corporate hustling? To a life with no life? To 50 hours a week behind a desk and no one to talk to? For excitement, you could take up a sport hunting. Weekends spent at a sim range firing light at a screen. And inside, the part of you that is warrior will wither and fade. And you'll be one among billions. A lonely woman marking time until she runs out of will. Your blooding will mean nothing. It will be an ugly scar from a life you once had. No more hunting, Machiko. How honourable you'll be. Noguchi sat on the floor for a very long time, feeling things she thought she'd left far behind.